The crying started at exactly 2:17 in the afternoon. Not the kind of crying people made when they wanted attention. It was quieter than that, broken, exhausted, almost swallowed by the walls. I was standing in my kitchen with a cup of coffee in my hand when I heard it through the open window, and something inside me immediately told me that whoever was crying was trying very hard to make sure nobody heard her. I looked toward the house next door. Its curtains were half drawn, the front door was closed, and the driveway was empty. Everything looked normal beneath the bright summer sun. But the crying continued. I had no idea that walking across that small patch of grass would change not only her life, but mine too. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness can give someone a second chance when the whole world has given up on them, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Legacy. Sometimes one small act of kindness becomes the reason someone survives another day. My name is Rowan Mercer, and I had lived in that quiet neighborhood for almost 6 years. It was the kind of place where mornings smelled like fresh coffee and cut grass, where children rode bicycles along the sidewalks, and where neighbors waved politely without knowing much about each other. I worked from home repairing old furniture, which meant most afternoons were quiet. I knew the people who lived around me by their routines more than their stories. The elderly couple across the street watered their roses every morning. The man 3 houses down washed his truck every Saturday. And the young woman who had moved into the house beside mine 3 months earlier was almost never seen outside. I had noticed her before, of course. Her name was Sienna. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with long dark blonde hair and a smile that appeared whenever someone caught her looking, but disappeared almost immediately afterward. She usually wore simple clothes, carried grocery bags alone, and kept her eyes lowered as though she had learned that being unnoticed was safer than being remembered. That afternoon, however, there was nothing hidden about her pain. I stood by my window for nearly a minute, debating whether I should interfere. Maybe she was having a terrible phone call. Maybe she was grieving. Maybe she simply needed privacy. I almost stepped away, but then I heard something crash inside her house, followed by a frightened gasp. My heart tightened. I put down my coffee, crossed my yard, and knocked on her door. There was no answer. I knocked again, louder this time. The crying stopped. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then I heard slow footsteps approaching. The door opened only a few inches, and Sienna stood behind it. She looked completely different from the woman I had occasionally seen outside. Her face was wet with tears, her eyes were swollen, and one side of her hair was messy as though she had been pulling at it. She tried to smile, but the expression collapsed almost instantly. I did not ask her to explain. I simply told her that I had heard something break and wanted to make sure she was safe. She looked over her shoulder toward the hallway, then back at me. For a moment, I thought she would close the door. Instead, she quietly stepped aside. Inside, the house was strangely beautiful and painfully empty. There were expensive-looking pieces of furniture, framed photographs turned face down on shelves, and unopened boxes stacked against the walls. A glass vase lay shattered across the kitchen floor. Sienna walked toward it automatically, as though she intended to clean it herself, but her hands began shaking. I stopped her and carefully gathered the broken pieces. She sat at the kitchen table while sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating tears that she kept wiping away with the sleeve of her shirt. That was when I noticed the bruises. They were faint, yellowing marks around her wrist, almost hidden beneath her sleeve. She noticed me looking and immediately pulled the fabric down. I did not press her. I simply finished cleaning the glass and told her that if she ever needed anything, even something as simple as a cup of coffee or someone to sit quietly beside her, my door was open. She stared at me as if those words were unfamiliar. Then she whispered that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone offer help without expecting something in return. I left that afternoon, but I could not stop thinking about her. The next morning, I placed a small basket outside her door with bread, fruit, coffee, and a note that simply said, "You don't have to explain anything." The basket disappeared before noon. The following day, I left another one. Slowly, without asking questions, I began becoming a small, dependable part of her life. Over the next few weeks, I learned pieces of her story. Sienna had once been an ambitious photographer who dreamed of opening a small studio. She had met a man named Calder Voss at a charity event and believed she had finally found someone who understood her. Instead, the relationship slowly became a cage. At first, Calder criticized her friends. Then he controlled her money. Then he began deciding where she could go, what she could wear, and who she could speak to. When she tried to leave, he convinced her that nobody would believe her and that she had nowhere to go. Eventually, she stopped fighting because exhaustion had become stronger than hope. The strange thing about cruelty is that it does not always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it arrives quietly, one insult at a time, one apology followed by another betrayal, until a person no longer recognizes the version of themselves who once believed they deserved better. One afternoon, I saw Sienna sitting on her front steps with an old camera in her lap. She had not used it in months. I asked her to take a photograph of the sunset with me. She hesitated, then finally lifted the camera. We walked to the park at the end of the street while golden sunlight poured through the trees. For the first time since I had met her, she laughed. It was a small laugh, almost surprised, as though she had forgotten the sound of it. That evening, everything changed again. A black car stopped outside her house. Sienna saw it through the window and froze. The color drained from her face. I watched from my porch as a man stepped out and walked toward her front door. She immediately locked it. Then another car appeared. I realized Calder had found her. Sienna called me with trembling hands. She was terrified, but this time she did not surrender to the fear. Together, we contacted the proper authorities and a local support service. I stayed nearby until help arrived. Calder tried to convince everyone that Sienna was unstable and that he was only there because he was worried about her. But this time, she had records. Messages. Financial documents. Photographs. And most importantly, she had finally found the courage to tell the truth. The days that followed were difficult. Sienna left the house temporarily and began rebuilding her life from somewhere safe. There were appointments, paperwork, sleepless nights, and moments when she questioned whether she had been strong enough. Whenever doubt returned, I reminded her that strength did not mean never being afraid. Strength meant choosing yourself while you were still afraid. 3 months later, Sienna returned to the neighborhood. But she was not the same woman who had opened that door on that summer afternoon. She had cut her hair shorter. She carried her camera everywhere. She had found part-time work at a photography studio and had started taking portraits for families who could not afford professional photographers. She told me that photographing people reminded her that every face carried a story, even when the world only saw the surface. One bright Saturday morning, I saw her standing in front of her house, hanging a small wooden sign above the garage. It read, "Vale Light Photography." I walked across the lawn and smiled. She smiled back. The garage became her studio. Soon, children were laughing inside it, couples were taking anniversary photographs, and families were lining up on weekends. The house that once seemed filled with silence became one of the warmest places on the street. Months later, Sienna gave me a photograph. It was a picture of my house at sunrise, with golden light spilling across the roof and trees. On the back she had written a simple message thanking me for hearing what she thought nobody would ever hear. I kept that photograph above my desk. People often imagine that changing someone's life requires money, power, or some extraordinary act. But sometimes it is much smaller than that. Sometimes it is knocking on a door. Sometimes it is leaving a basket of groceries. Sometimes it is sitting beside someone without demanding their story. And sometimes it is simply believing a person when they have spent years being told that their pain does not matter. I still think about that afternoon at 2:17. I think about how easily I could have ignored the sound coming through my window. I could have told myself it was none of my business. I could have closed the window and returned to my work. But I didn't. And neither did Sienna. She chose to open the door. That night changed everything, not because I rescued her, but because she finally realized she was worth rescuing herself. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who may need a little hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Legacy. Your support helps these stories reach people who might be silently fighting battles of their own. And before you leave, I have one special request. Comment "Someone heard me" if you believe that one act of kindness can change a person's entire life. Because somewhere next door, someone may be crying quietly today, believing nobody cares. Sometimes, all they need is for one person to listen. And sometimes, that one person can become the beginning of everything.